Welcome back to the Remote Life. My name is Han Talbot, also known as Han World, and today we'll be chatting with Audrey Scott. Originally from the US, Audrey is the co-founder of Uncornered Market, a tourism and marketing consultancy that helps destinations and travel companies develop sustainable products and connect travelers to meaningful experiences. In this episode, we dive into what sustainable travel really means in action, surprising sustainability practices that can be game changers, and how to apply these principles to content creation and personal branding. So grab a coffee, a tea, or something stronger, and let's get started. Audrey, welcome to the Remote Life podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me on. It's been a while since I last saw you, so it's nice to continue the conversation.
100%. For some context for people listening, we actually first met at WTM, so World Travel Market London panel, and obviously, like, you guys presented an amazing presentation about mindful tourism and content. And honestly, it's just stuck with me ever since that panel. Yeah, it's been, I think, 5 years, and it still sticks with me to this day. And so I thought it was high time that we have a conversation here, because I feel like, honestly, after the whole sort of over tourism media craziness that happened over the summer, this feels like such a good topic, and especially now more than ever, to be talking about. So I'm really excited for you to be here.
Well, excited to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, let's kick things off. Tell us about you and your remote life journey so far.
Wow. Okay. This goes back a long way. Guess you could kind of say we're part of the old guard. It actually started unintentionally in 2007. So we're going back a long ways. My husband and I, Dan and I, decided to take a 12 to 18 month creative sabbatical around the world. And within the first few months, we started picking up work, travel writing, travel photography work. And we realized as long as we have an internet connection, we can actually do work on the road, or we can continue traveling. This is before digital nomadism was even a word, but that started the idea of, okay, we can work remotely as long as we have an internet connection. And so that carried us for the next, I would say, 6-7 years. So that 12 to 18 months it turned into almost 7 years. Our work transitioned a little bit more from travel writing and photography, more to, we built up our own blog, which was Uncornered Market, and started working with tourism boards and travel companies, marketing campaigns, brand ambassadorships. And eventually we also started working more with sustainable tourism organizations and companies, let's say sustainable tourism companies or travel companies that wanted to, let's say, incorporate more sustainability into their practices. So now our work, we have a base in Berlin, Germany, but our work is still location independent or remote, meaning that we have our base here in Berlin, but most of our clients are international. So for example, we were recently in Karakol in Kyrgyzstan. I was also recently in Fergana Valley, Uzbekistan, working on projects. So part of the work is in Berlin, remote, and then part of it's on the ground. So we've kind of kept that spirit going, even though we do have a home base now.
I love that so much, and I'm so inspired by that, what you guys are up to. Before we really dive into things properly, what to you does sustainable travel or sustainability actually mean?
So there's a lot of technical answers to that, but the, let's say, definition or the response that I always go back to, that we always go back to, that's kind of been with us from the beginning to try and simplify it, is basically traveling with respect for local environment, local people, and local economy. And those three elements are really important, because a lot of times with sustainability, the environment gets most of the attention, and I understand why, especially now with the climate crisis. There's a lot of things happening. However, sustainable tourism really needs to incorporate all three, meaning traveling in a way that you are benefiting the local economy. Your money is staying local. It's going to local businesses. Traveling in a way that's respectful of local culture and people, helping to preserve or conserve some of those cultures. And then, of course, the environmental aspect, which is, reducing your impact, or your environmental impact, whether that's carbon, whether that's waste, whether that's resource use. But really all three go together, because without all three, it's not really, let's say, sustainable, meaning they're out of balance. So in practice, that can sometimes be a little bit more challenging, but it's the idea of having those three pillars in your head when you think about sustainability, I think, is really important.
It's a funny one, is though. I don't know if you agree, but I feel like the term sustainability also kind of comes with some sort of nervousness. I feel like if it's such a big term, especially as you mentioned the climate crisis, and that obviously we have so much more access to the information about as well. And then for myself, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, if I so can try to take all this on in my head, I'll go crazy, because I'm a new person. And I thought to take away responsibility either. But I suppose for anybody who's maybe kind of oh my gosh, this is such a big topic. How can I actually like put all of this into action? Or like, how do I do this just myself as one person with what I've got available?
Very good question, because the reality is it is complex, it is messy.
Yeah.
However, even as one person, our decisions and our actions have impact, and that could be positive, that could be negative. The other thing, and I'm going to get a little bit more into kind of positive and negative impact shortly, but the other thing to keep in mind is no one is perfect. Like, we shouldn't be trying to achieve some like perfect sustainability score. A, it's not possible. And B, when I think about sustainable travel or traveling sustainably, I think about, okay, how do my behaviors and how do my decisions align with my values? My values are trying to travel in a way that benefits the local place that I'm visiting, benefits the local people, benefits the local economy, benefits the environment. How do my travel decisions, how do my purchasing decisions align with those values? And it doesn't have to be something, a super big thing. It can be something even really small about making decisions like eating at your local food stall. You know, this idea of frequenting and spending your money with small businesses. When you choose accommodation, maybe it's searching for locally owned accommodation or, for example, local tours, you know, local guides. You just mentioned earlier before we hit record, you mentioned a food tour. These are all great ways that your money can stay in the economy where local people, you know, whether it's through jobs or whether it's through earning income, they're also benefiting from the tourism economy while you're also benefiting from having that connection, even with reducing carbon, which is a big, you know, thing, especially in travel, you know, related to, because the biggest, let's say, environmental impact from travel is related to carbon emissions from airlines. At the same time, airlines are incredibly important, you know, trying to reduce your flights, but don't, again, try and get that perfect score. Think about, okay, maybe if I'm in Europe, there might be opportunities to take the train, or perhaps even traveling in Asia. Traveling across India by train is an amazing experience. So when you think about these options that you have, don't necessarily think about it as giving something up, but it's more like what, let's say, additional experience might I have by either taking the train, taking the bus, or maybe changing my route a little bit so that way I don't have to take as many flights. And there are a lot of people who say, well, my actions don't really matter. But I actually believe every traveler has a lot of potential. Just think about how travel changes us, all the experiences, all the knowledge. That same thing can go outward as well in terms of the positive impact that travelers can have. And so it is complex, but if you break it down into these small decisions, or even just think before I make a purchase, or maybe before choosing the next place that I live, you know, you talked about, or not last place that I live, but next place that I travel, you know, you talked about over tourism. Maybe think, is that a place that already gets a lot of visitors? If so, then maybe there's other secondary cities or even tertiary cities, or maybe there's other countries that actually are really interested in having more visitors or actually don't have the same, let's say, current burden from tourism. So thinking about all of those things, and not in a way that it takes away from your experience, but think about it more in terms of how might these decisions make my experience better. I've done work with Moldova, which is this cute, beautiful little country, tiny country between Romania and Ukraine. And when I see all these stories about, you know, over tourism in so many cities in Europe, I'm thinking, oh, Chisinau, the capital city, is like a great city break for Europeans. I mean, the wine is amazing. The food is great. It has incredible culture and opera. I can go to the opera for 15 euros. There's so many different opportunities there. And so I guess I just maybe say, when thinking about your decisions, think about, okay, what are my values? And then how can my decisions align with them? And how can my choices and behaviors align with those values?
Also, I suppose at the end of the day, we'll talk a bit more about content in a minute, but also think about, okay, right, I don't have to go somewhere for the content, or like I don't have to share it online too as well. Like, I can go and just enjoy an experience. I think people don't quite think about that now. Wait, if I didn't put it on, that's still that whole thing of, was I really there? And it's like, no, you don't necessarily have to go to these places. I was also thinking, one thing we don't necessarily talk about as well is the fact that it's not necessarily about doing lots of big actions, but it is, in terms of sustainability, it's those small actions done sustainably, consistently and sustainably as well. I guess that's another spin on it too.
Yeah, definitely. And as I say, as in travel, as at home, you know, or you could say as at home, as in travel. Like if you kind of have this type of lifestyle at home, bring it with you traveling, and maybe vice versa, because all those little decisions do make a difference. And even, again, this idea of traveling respectfully. I was recently on a project in Eastern Kyrgyzstan, in Karakol, And several of the accommodation providers who have kind of gone through the sustainability journey, they're now so appreciative of travelers who understand a little bit more about sustainability and are respectful, So these types of behaviors do have an impact, the way that you interact with people, the way that you're curious about their food, the way that you decide to visit the place and spend money, with local guides or local tours. All of those things do have an impact, even if they might seem like, oh, well, this is just a small thing. They add up over time.
100%. Are there any practices that people might be surprised by, or one that maybe been a game changer for you at all?
So one of the things that really surprised me, and this is for sustainable travel, but it's also for sustainability in life in general, is actually the impact of food waste. Food waste and also food choices. I really didn't know what an impact this had on, let's say, carbon, but also resource use until a few years ago, but pre-pandemic, so I guess it's now 5-6 years ago. Working on a project in the Mediterranean. It was a project that was bringing together national parks and tourism to sort of try and create kind of eco or conservation tourism activities. And they were measuring the impact, kind of the environmental impact of all the different activities in these tours. And what surprised everyone, including the scientists, is outside of the transportation to get there, because many of them were flying or whatever, the biggest impact wasn't, the vehicle or train transportation. It wasn't the accommodation. It was actually the food. Because what they found was that it was the Mediterranean. It's this big hospitality, so there ended up being a lot of food waste. And on top of that, a lot of meat. And meat also has a very heavy impact. So it's made me think a little bit differently about how I order food at restaurants. I really try not to overorder. Or if I do, I try and see if I can take it home, whether I'm staying in, an apartment or something like that. As well as in general, I've reduced my meat consumption. I'm not a vegetarian, but I'm just more conscious of it. So that was something that kind of through a project or through this research made me kind of open my eyes to, wow, I'd never thought about all the food choices we make have an impact. And I don't say that to say you should deny yourself, because I'm a foodie. I love eating. And
food is point to so many cultures as well. Like you can't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or I was I did a food tour literally within the first 24 hours of being here in Kuala Lumpur, because it's such an entry point to a culture.
It is. And it's actually one of the reasons to travel. I mean, for me, it really is like being able to explore new foods. And as you said, it's not just the food, it's the people behind it. And then you learn the stories of the dishes and then the agricultural traditions. So I don't say this to say you should limit yourself or reduce the food choices you make. But it is something that surprised me, is thinking about food waste and also thinking about the food choices. And just getting back to kind of the earlier thing, when you also choose, like you were saying, the local food tour or eating at local food stalls, which is one of the best things to do in Southeast Asia. Again, that food is fresh. It comes from local farmers, and that the money is going to usually a local family or some kind of small business. So like all of that together. So yeah, that was one of the things that surprised me. I'm trying to think of others. Yeah.
Just to add on to that, but I was thinking also that I don't know if this is the case, but it feels like the portion sizes have got bigger too.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just me and how my eating habits have changed, but I feel like, especially here in Asia, that portions are quite huge. I mean, it's not in Asia, I would say, even in the Balkans, and obviously much of the Mediterranean, like food is life. Food is like such a way to bring people together, and like it is the entry point to culture. That I've done trips where we've had 7 servings of something at a dinner, and you're like, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly, this is per meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, how I do this. And some people were laughing at me in my last destination because I had a takeaway box and I took stuff away, but I was like, no, these portion sizes are huge, and actually that could do me for dinner or my next meal. Like I think it's also maybe normalizing the fact that it's okay to ask for a takeaway box or take your own with you. So I've got some collapsible ones also in my suitcase, and I get people like, wait, you think about that stuff? Because portion sizes are huge.
Yep, that's a great example of, you mentioned actually having the takeaway box. I'm also one of those geeks. And often, I mean, especially if you're staying in an apartment or something like that, it often is another meal, or at least
100%.
a partial meal. Yeah.
And you can find collapsible ones. That's really nerdy of me to say right now, but you can find collapsible ones. So people maybe go, but how do we fit my Tupperware in my food kit? You don't have to. There are collapsible ones now.
Yeah.
Maybe I should put them so short of it.
No, you should, because I mean, actually, those little things, people just don't think about it. It's like, A, they're collapsible so they don't take up much space, but
Yes.
B, all the different use cases, because you can
Yeah.
actually tell the stories of the experiences when you have used them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think showing people, not necessarily how it's done, but how you're using it, your experience. And again, focusing on the benefits, A, reduced food waste, but B, bonus, I have an extra meal, like this
Mhm.
isn't about giving something up. It's actually about getting something more. I
Yeah.
did have one other thought in terms of something that
Go
surprised
for it.
me. And that is, I think in, a lot of times when we're traveling, we see, sometimes there's tours, related to like cultural dinners or some of these cultural events. And I've always appreciated them, but I think more recently I've realized the role that they can play, especially in, let's say, more developing destinations. So places that don't have as many tourists, and also maybe kind of lower economic, kind of socioeconomic areas, is that choosing those tours actually can have a really interesting impact on, let's say, if it's a local family that's hosting it. I'm thinking like a cultural dinner or something like that. It actually can have a really interesting impact on valuing that culture in a different way because it's something that they often take for granted. It's like, this is our culture, this is our food. But being able to share those stories and being able to also see like, wow, there are these visitors, there are these foreigners, there are these different people who are interested in my culture, interested in my food. It kind of provides a bit of a local pride and kind of a value to that. And in this recent project I was working on in Karakol in Kyrgyzstan, it's a town that has a really interesting multi-ethnic identity. And part of the process of developing these cultural dinners is that the different ethnic groups, so there's like Dongan Chinese and Uyghur Chinese and Russian Cossacks and Kyrgyz and Tatars, all these different groups. The process of developing the dinners actually spurred the families to start researching their cultural heritage, researching their cuisine, and their children were like, oh, wow, visitors are actually interested in this. The children are now more interested in learning the dialect or learning the local language or learning these cultural traditions. So that's kind of a knock-on effect that I didn't really think about or maybe experience so much until I actually started getting more into the nuts and bolts of kind of helping to develop these cultural products or helping to kind of work with small businesses as they develop them. So when you're thinking about, let's say, taking a food tour, maybe thinking about a cultural experience, think about, again, some of those knock-on effects that might have for that family, but also in terms of kind of cultural, let's say, conservation or valuing it.
I know we just like honestly just said about food is integral into culture, but it really is like we're at the core. I feel like as human beings, like food is such a good way to open conversation in general with people, like whether that is about the food you're trying itself and culture, or if that's also talking about your culture with people. Because I feel like we also have so many different perceptions that we see online, and it's especially I think that it's being opened up a lot more now. But I know that for me, I still travel places and people are so surprised and like hear about like even the things about the UK or like Western Europe,
Yeah.
and it's really very interesting. They've got such obviously like very specific perceptions for obvious reasons, but it's just such a good way almost to kind of I suppose spin up the world in a way, like to each other.
Yeah.
Like, it's that probably a bit cheesy, but
No, I mean, that's actually one of the beautiful things about travel is that you have this opportunity to meet people in all different places in their homes. And one of the things we used to call it was two-way storytelling, because often we think about telling the stories of the places we meet, the people we meet. But really, when traveling, it's this two-way storytelling where the people you meet are not only sharing their story, but you're sharing your own story. I mean, I come from the United States. There's lots of different impressions of the United States. And that exchange, I think, is one of, like, that personal exchange and that personal connection is one of the most beautiful things about travel. And as you said, food is a natural way. Like, we all have to eat. There's a reason why breaking bread is so important in so many cultures, like literally breaking bread, as a way to share it. And I think it is because we are wired for connection and we are wired for sharing and learning.
it makes me want to like organize some kind of like food thing. I'm like, oh, I don't like come up. Yeah. It's one of those things that I definitely do miss also, I guess, when I'm traveling a bit like quicker, because some of my favorite evenings are not necessarily on tours, but just with people in general when you're like traveling as well and you like you get a coffee or whatever it is. We sort of briefly touched upon this already, but how would you maybe apply some of these sort of things to content? Because I feel like one thing I kind of talk to people about is the fact that like, okay, yes, sustainability is a huge topic and we're one person. So what is it that you could do as an individual? Like, what aspect are you maybe a bit more specialist in, or like, what can you bring to the table as you individually? And for me, it feels like talking more about content creation practices and whatnot. What would you, let's say, is a good way to think about content, or from a more mindful or more sustainable perspective?
So I'd say go back to those values again. Think about how, let's say, the content you're creating, how are they an extension, or how do they reflect those values? And not to get too heady or, but if, for example, you were talking about food and how that's really important to you when traveling. And it's not just because of the deliciousness of the food, it's because of the connection to the people. So even sharing content about those tours or about those experiences where it's not just about those great dishes, but you're also sharing the stories of the people you meet. And then maybe add, and don't call it sustainability because then some people get turned off, but the added benefit of the fact that, you booked with a local company or you went to a local restaurant, or how all of these different things, these different decisions or these different behaviors are connected to, let's say, benefiting the local community, benefiting the local economy. And I would say, don't be preachy about it. No one likes to be told what to do. And no one wants to be made to feel guilty because they used, a plastic straw. No one wants to feel guilty because they were thirsty and they bought a single-use plastic bottle. It's like, again, no one is perfect. We all have situations, we all have circumstances. So the idea is do not be judgmental, do not be perfect. But share your sustainability journey in such a way that you're showing how you're learning and growing at the same time. You mentioned your
Collapsible bowls.
Collapsible bowls. I mean, my husband laughs at me because every time we pack for a trip, I get my reusable coffee mug,
Yeah.
And he kind of laughs. He's like, it's just a coffee mug. I'm like, I know, but it makes me feel better that I know that like I have it with me. And so again, you're sharing your own journey, but you're also sharing even also some of your mistakes, the things that you've learned over time. In our earlier conversation, we were talking about photography. That was something that, we look back at some of our photographs and think, oh gosh, we didn't go through the process. So this is actually maybe something also related to content creation, is when taking photographs, be sure that you are asking permission of people. Be sure that they want to be photographed. When it comes to children, avoid it as much as you can. There's a lot on child welfare related to photography. We actually have an article on our website on that if anyone wants to go into that deeper. But the idea is, imagine, like, would you do this at home? And would you want someone coming up to you on the street and taking your photograph without being asked for permission? And there are some places where people love being photographed. I was recently in Fergana Valley in Uzbekistan, which is not very well traveled. You go into the market, and everyone is just so excited to see a visitor. And when you ask, can you take your photo? Everyone's really excited, and they're bringing their family in, and they're bringing in their vendors. And it becomes almost like a social experiment. There's also other places where, or not experiment, but it's like it's experience. And then there's other places where people really are tired of having the camera stuck in their face, in markets like in Barcelona or other places. So just being respectful of, we all want to get good photos. A lot of people like taking photos of people, but be respectful of that person's privacy and ask permission. And often when you ask permission, you also can sometimes create that personal connection as well. Like often when we did a lot more, let's say, photography projects, we would be in markets, let's say in Bolivia. A lot of times in Bolivia, people do not like their photo being taken. But we would ask, let's say, a market vendor, can I take your photo? And they would say, well, why? And I'd say, well, I'm from the United States and we don't have markets like this. And I'd like to be able to show this. Often they would say yes, because it was kind of like, we want to show your culture. And so that starts that conversation of, I'm from this country, we don't have this, you have this. Maybe it ends up starting another conversation. So that's just maybe a bit of a diversion on photography.
No, I could 100%. It's one thing that I've come up against a lot as well. Honestly, I genuinely said that when your presentation at WTM about asking permission, honestly, made me rethink so much like how I approach photography, and permission is a huge part of it, because I've been asked for my photos several times in different cultures because I don't necessarily look like the people at the place I've gone to, right? I never even myself stopped to think, okay, am I comfortable with this as well? I do ask permission. A lot of times people are like, so you don't have to, it's fine. Like, but no, I want to respect your space. And then they go, oh, well, thank you. Or vendors will say, can you please just take photos of my hands or videos of my hands while I'm doing the thing? Actually, that works out better because it feels less invasive while also showcasing what people are doing too. So I honestly, it's that asking permission is huge, because even when people then ask me, I feel more empowered to say no. Oh, but you've got your brunette hair and blue eyes. I'm like, okay, but like, where's my photo going?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the web. But no, I think it's such a good point. And the thing about kids as well is there's just so many different things about a kid who's benefiting from the photo. Like, yes, it might be a fun moment, but then who is making money from the content? Like, there's so many cases gone wrong for the subject of the photo for the sake of one beautiful photograph that it kind of, I think, warrants more conversation now as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, this was something that, being transparent about what one learns. I look back at some of our early photos. Well, yes, we did get permission from the parents, but at the same time, or the kids wanted us to take photos. But I wouldn't necessarily go and do that same thing again today because I have a bit more, let's say, understanding of, let's say, the complexities. But I've also seen over time in some places, especially traveling, like, for example, in Ethiopia, opened up our eyes to a lot of things where, when kids are expecting to get money for this, it creates also a lot of, let's say, complex socioeconomic issues. It kind of gets to the point where you want to create a connection with kids. And sometimes they do love having their photos taken because they love seeing it in the screen. And if that's the situation, then consider doing it, but then don't post it. That's kind of a moment you had with that kid. Or maybe try and find a way where you can send the photo to the parents. Now there's so many more people that have cell phones or to be able to share
Social
it with
media.
the parents.
Yep.
But maybe consider not posting it publicly. And if you do, then don't tag it or don't put the location tag because that can also become problematic as well. So
one thing I've also noticed as well is that these are trends that kind of exacerbated by the pandemic. But when we kind of came out of the pandemic, obviously there was a mad rush to some of the cafes and restaurants, and obviously we were just doing this whole revenge travel, thing, which I had no idea was a thing until like September. People were like, "Oh yeah, people have stopped their revenge travel." Revenge travel?
Yeah.
And for anyone who was also confused, it was this concept that it was travel at all costs, and I think that's also what became part of the over tourism issue that we really saw, but it's also been a prevalent problem for a while, this summer. One thing that people are really kind of quite shocked to hear or don't necessarily think about is that actually not all businesses want exposure.
Yeah.
Not all businesses want to be called a hidden gem. Like, I don't know if you know, but there are actually businesses saying, please stop taking photos and TikToks and all the rest of it of our business. And then those people were getting really frustrated, but it was actually, no, some of these businesses just want to, feed their families, feed their workers, stay afloat, and they're good. Not every business wants scale. Not every business wants the marketing. And I think that's also kind of a countered place where we're also at now, where people are like, again, if I didn't post it, was I really there? But I feel like that's also a new consideration that we're hitting. I don't know if that's something that you've noticed.
I've noticed that with businesses. I've noticed restaurants, you mentioned cafes and restaurants. I've also noticed that even with some destinations who are like, or even, special like locations within a city or something who are like, we're actually okay being undiscovered. We don't want all the crowds. Like, we have our regular travelers who are curious and they find us through their normal ways. Like, we don't want the mass crowds. And so being conscious of that, even again, maybe when you're at the cafe asking, again, it can sometimes be an awkward position. I think those cafes that are very, let's say, open about that, they often will post signs. But the other thing to think about is maybe just don't tag. Maybe it was a beautiful latte, or maybe it was a beautiful coffee art, but just don't tag where it is. And I don't think anyone is going to really recognize the cafe based on the flower on your cappuccino. So you can still post the nice experience without actually tagging the place. And this also gets to something that also occurred during the pandemic and has continued afterwards, is tagging fragile natural places. There's some, because with the pandemic, there was a big push to get into national parks and to get outdoors, which was great, except the over-tourism also happened in some of these national parks where some of the trails were getting, basically getting destroyed because of so many people. And then people were going off trail, to get closer to the waterfall or whatever. Or people were going to these really remote places. Iceland is a perfect example. It's a really, really fragile environment. When you go off the road on your car, you might actually, that environment or that, not the grass, but the moss, that could have an impact for years, if not decades. And people don't realize it because they're like, oh, I'm just going off track. So even if you do find someplace that's beautiful, someplace that's amazing, nature is literally awe-inspiring, and you do want to share it, if it is a fragile place, or if it's a place that really, again, think about local people. Do they really want more people coming through their backyard to get there? Think about just Or I would recommend just not geotagging it. And even some national parks in the United States have gone so far to say, and actually in Canada too, I think there's been a campaign that says, please don't geotag, like from the government saying, please don't geotag these places, because people are sometimes going, like they're destroying the environment to get to some of these remote places, but also these places cannot sustain large groups of people, And on the other side of that, there's also lots of incredible places that, as I mentioned, do want more visitors or do want more attention, So think about, again, maybe these are conversations you have with local people, or maybe it's just kind of doing your research and to say, okay, these are actually places that would like a little more publicity or that would be interested in having more visitors come. And maybe focus your attention, in your content streams more on those places, because they will appreciate it. And also with that, the idea of when you're sharing content about a place, share some of the tips that kind of, don't call them responsible tourism tips, but some of the kind of ways that you are engaging with the place that is perhaps more sustainable or that perhaps is more respectful. We visited Ladakh in northern India, I guess it's now like 10 years ago, and we wrote an article about it that included kind of how we chose our trail and how we chose the tour company, but also the different steps we took with, bringing our reusable bottle and refilling it with, boiled water, some of the things that we did. And the local tour company that we worked with, that we wrote about, we found them, it was all our own money, it wasn't a sponsored trip. Later, he said, well, we don't just thank you for sending more visitors to us because we've received a lot more, tours and trekkers because of you. But also they tend to be more respectful, or they tend to act a little bit more responsible because they've read your article and they're more aligned with that. So again, when we think about we're one person, we can't make a difference, or we don't have a lot of difference. The actions we do can make a difference, but also the content we create, you don't know who's going to read it, and you don't know who's going to act on it. Like before this conversation, I had no idea that the panel discussion we did at WTM had such a big impact. Like that was amazing to hear. Like I really didn't know. And so think about your content in that way of how people will be not just viewing it, but how they can be using it or applying it as well.
So true. And you talked about boundaries. I think it was to add on to that. For me, I would say, what's the story you're trying to tell?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it that you want to tell the story of the destination, or is it to get more likes? Which there's nothing wrong with getting more likes, but I guess it's being more mindful again of what it is that you were trying to share online at the end of the day. Because even if you're someone who just, quote, has one follower, like you're still technically influencing that follower by sharing. So just being mindful, I guess, also about what it is that you were trying to put out there. And also on the flip side, not to take all the responsibility away from the viewer, but it's also being aware, okay, you've seen a nice picture. Why is it you want to go to, say, for example, like the Eiffel Tower? I know it's a big bad example, but of why is it you want to go to like that? I mean, for me, I saw it a lot in Bali. Like I think it's starting to happen now, that you see lots of people queuing up for these sites and then leaving or getting frustrated because they want to cover up their nice Instagram outfit for this. What at a literal temple.
Yeah.
I partly wonder, could you have got the same rush from the notifications that back home? What was your reason for doing it?
Yeah.
I think that in my mind is maybe another.
That there's a lot of psychology and a lot of let's say social influence behind that. That's probably I completely agree with you. And also I have to remember I'm very fortunate. I've traveled a lot, and so the Eiffel Tower might not be on my list of top places. At the same time, I also have a lot of friends in the United States who've never traveled to Europe, and so for them it's this iconic site. And I understand that. I think the challenge is that Instagram has almost it's made these iconic sites the experience, or the reason or the purpose, because as you said, if I didn't share it, did it happen? And there's a lot of, let's say, psychology behind that, but I don't know how to.
We'll leave that one there.
Yeah.
But it does absolutely lead into one of my last questions I asked, which is there anything you'd like to see more from the travel industry in general? I mean, one thing I sort of thought earlier was, is there a funner way to talk about sustainable travel? Is there anything that you think could be maybe done or talked about, or more or less of, in the travel industry overall? Big question.
Yeah. Yes, there is a lot. We've been talking a lot about the traveler in terms of their decisions and their behaviors and how that can contribute to more sustainable travel. And then on the flip side, there's a supply side, which is the products and the experiences and the accommodation and basically the whole tourism infrastructure. There is progress being made where more companies are, integrating sustainability principles into their operations. The ideal situation is that anything that's built has this built in from the beginning. So it's, as we call it, it's like sustainability by default. So it's not that you're making a decision between more sustainable and less sustainable. It's kind of, they're all sustainable, but we have a really long ways to go there. What I'd like to see from the travel industry is actually more transparency, because I think right now it's really confusing, and kind of transparency and consistency on how they're reporting on their sustainability activities or how they're reporting on their impacts. Because right now, as a consumer, even one who's pretty educated and working in this field, it can be confusing. I see a certification. What does that mean? I see these kind of great words of carbon neutral. What does that mean? So I would actually like to see the travel industry be more transparent in how they communicate their sustainability initiatives to make it easier for travelers to really understand, okay, what does this really mean in terms of the impact if I choose this business, but also the impact on my experience, and also more sharing, because it feels right now that a lot of travel companies are, and I get this, it's a very competitive industry. I would love to see where travel companies are actually sharing what they're doing so others can learn from them, kind of leapfrog, so that way they don't have to go through all the beginning steps, but they can learn from people who are perhaps from the companies that are perhaps bigger, who have more resources, who've developed different solutions. And that sharing, I think, would help bring everyone up. So not easy. Still a lot of work. But yeah, the goal is eventually we don't have sustainable tourism and tourism. We just have tourism where sustainability is embedded in. But there's a long way to go.
Yeah. And the way something interesting as well, because I think about, for example, when I go into like a hotel, and hotels still have this kind of narrative of like, we want to preserve the environment. Make sure you don't use like all your towels or the events. Yeah. We're very kind of like, not doom and gloom, because it kind of puts the onus on like, you are naughty if you use both of it. Yeah. It's almost like switching the focus from that's all you can do. Like, I'm sorry, the plastic straw conversation, like as if that's the thing that is like this going to move the needle.
Yeah.
I suppose I like that idea, because rather than, yes, okay, tell people about the environmental impacts of your washing, but then that sort of positive, this is how we do it, being that example, that's something I never really thought about, but it's so true. It's the hotels or that the brands also taking that focus off as that part and focusing it towards what can be done.
And even changing the communication dynamic. I've seen so many, actually, even for a recent client, they had kind of like a traveler code of conduct, and it was all negative. It was all like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And we said, what if we switch it around? So instead of telling people what they shouldn't do, you provide ideas or you provide recommendations of what they should do. And that is, in my opinion, a more inviting way to engage travelers into the sustainability journey or into the activities. And being really clear on communication as to why you're doing it. Like, there's a great hotel in Kathmandu in Nepal. Now, of course, Heritage, I think it's called Heritage. And anyway, it's run by Royal Mountain Tours. And the owner, he's really inspiring. He's great. And everything in this hotel was very custom built with, local materials. The guards are women. Again, they're changing the gender dynamics. So the guards are women. There's a lot of different things that they're doing. And you will not find bottled water on the menu. All the rooms have filtered water. The restaurant, they bring you out filtered water. And he said, if a tourist traveler demands it, we will go and get them bottled water. But first, we'll explain how we treat the water, how it's safe, why we do it. And we'll also then charge them a lot of money for that bottled water. So they first communicate with like, we want to engage you in this. We're communicating with you, or we're engaging with you by providing, the filtered water, and we're telling you that it's safe. And then if you really, really want it, then we'll provide it with you. But it kind of changes the dynamic a bit. Instead of saying like, don't drink bottled water, they're just like not even supplying it. So it just removes it from the conversation in some respects. So more kind of creative things like that I think would be useful, because people won't even notice many times if, for example, their lunch box on their tour is not packaged in plastic. They won't, these things, if it's kind of integrated in, or in some respects, it's like you don't even offer a less sustainable choice. If you look at behavior science, in order for travelers to choose more sustainable choices, they need to be fun, exciting, attractive, easy, kind of easy to do. And so I think that's the challenge for the travel industry, is how to make sustainability, these choices, more attractive and easy to act on and easy to choose and easy to book. That's kind of one of the things I'm trying to work on.
No, I love that. I think I could keep talking about this for ages. So I'm gonna leave it like here. I have one final thing that I would love for you to answer. So fill in the blank. Home is where.
So the cheesy part is home is where the heart is. But at the same time, I actually think that's true, because when I say home is where the heart is, it's where you feel comfortable, at peace. It's where kind of you're at one with your heart, or you're at one with who you are.
Beautiful. Love it. Audrey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been so great to chat.
And thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Remote Life. And thank you, Audrey, for taking the time to speak with us. You can find links to our profiles below. Thank you so much again for listening, and we can't wait to work with you again soon.